The crash in the woods. It was a quiet night in the forest. The sky was full of stars. The wind moved slowly through the tall trees, and everything was calm. Ethan, a young man in his 20s, was sitting alone in his small wooden cabin. He lived far from the city, deep in the woods. He liked peace and quiet. He was reading a book, his old dog Max sleeping by the fire. Then, suddenly, boom! The ground shook. The windows rattled. A loud sound came from the sky. It was not thunder. It was something else. Something heavy and fast. Max jumped up and barked loudly. Ethan dropped his book and ran to the window. A bright light moved across the sky, fast like a falling star. But it was bigger. Much bigger. Then, crash! A huge flash lit up the forest. Birds flew from the trees. Smoke rose into the air. "What the hell was that?" Ethan whispered. Max barked again, running in circles near the door. Ethan grabbed his flashlight, a coat, and a small first aid kit. He didn't know what he would find, but something inside him told him to go. He stepped outside, feeling the cold air hit his face. The forest was dark and quiet again, but the smell of smoke was strong. He followed it. Max stayed close, growling low. As Ethan walked deeper into the woods, the trees grew thicker. The light from the crash had disappeared, but he followed the smoke. After 10 minutes of walking, he saw it. A strange metal object was stuck between the trees. It was shaped like a long egg, broken in two. Pieces of it were glowing faintly. Blue lights blinked slowly on the side. It was not human. It was not a plane. It was a spaceship. Ethan couldn't believe it. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The air smelled like burnt wires and strange chemicals. Then he heard it. A soft, painful sound, like someone crying. Not loud, almost like a whisper. He turned his flashlight and moved it slowly across the ground. Then he saw her. A girl, not human. Her skin was pale silver, glowing softly. Her hair was white and long. She was crawling on the ground, one leg twisted, blood on her arms. She looked hurt, very hurt. Ethan froze. She looked up at him with wide, glowing eyes. Her lips moved, but the words were not English. Still, he could feel her fear. She was trying to say something. Her voice was weak. "Please," she whispered. "Help." Then her eyes went wide, and she looked behind her into the forest. "They're coming," she said. Her voice was shaking. "Who's coming?" Ethan asked, confused. She tried to crawl toward him but collapsed. She pointed toward the trees with a shaking hand. Ethan looked around. The forest was silent again, but something felt wrong. Like the air itself had changed. Max growled, fur standing up. He never growled like that unless there was danger. Ethan knelt beside the girl. He could see that her wounds were deep. Her breathing was weak. She was cold. He looked at her face. She was young, maybe a teenager in human years. She was scared, alone, and in pain. She needed help. Ethan hesitated. His mind screamed, "Run. This is too big for you." But his heart said something else. He couldn't leave her. Slowly, carefully, he picked her up. She was light, lighter than she looked. Her arms wrapped weakly around his neck. "I've got you," Ethan whispered. "You're safe now." He turned around and started walking back toward his cabin. The forest behind him stayed quiet, but he felt eyes watching him. The trees no longer felt peaceful. Something was coming, something dangerous. And now, Ethan had no idea what he had just stepped into. But one thing was clear. This alien girl had landed on Earth, wounded and alone, and only a human had answered her call for help. The hidden enemy. The forest was darker now. Cold wind passed through the trees like whispers. Ethan held the alien girl tightly in his arms, walking as fast as he could toward his cabin. She was still unconscious, her head resting on his shoulder. Her glowing skin lit the path around them with a soft silver light. Max, the dog, walked beside Ethan, ears up, nose sniffing the air, growling every few steps. Ethan's mind was spinning. Who was this girl? Where did she come from? And who was coming for her? The moment she whispered, "They're coming," something inside him changed. This was no normal crash. This was something bigger, something dangerous. Finally, they reached the cabin. Ethan pushed the door open with his foot and laid her gently on the couch. Max ran to the window and sat, still growling softly. Ethan took out the first aid kit and started cleaning her wounds. Her blood was thick and silver. Her skin felt warm, almost like it had a heartbeat of its own. She didn't flinch as he cleaned the cuts. After a few minutes, her eyes opened. She blinked slowly, then looked around. Her eyes landed on Ethan. "You helped me," she said in a weak, broken voice. "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "You were hurt." She nodded. "I thank you. But danger is near." Ethan leaned in. "Who's coming? What danger?" She looked at him with sadness. "Hunters," she whispered. "They chase me. They destroy." Suddenly, she sat up, panicked. Her hands moved fast, drawing shapes in the air. Ethan grabbed a pencil and notebook. "Here, draw." She quickly drew strange symbols. Circles, triangles, arrows pointing down, a star breaking apart. Then she looked at him with wide eyes. "They find energy," she said. "If you use power, they track." Ethan's heart dropped. He looked around. His lights were on. The heater was running. The radio still played soft static in the background. "Oh no," he muttered. He jumped up and shut everything off. Lights, heater, even the power switch to the cabin. The place went completely dark except for her glowing skin. For a few minutes, everything was silent again. Then, a soft humming sound came from outside. It was low, mechanical. It sounded like a machine floating in the air. Ethan rushed to the window and pulled the curtain back a little. A drone, large and black. It hovered slowly above the trees, a red light scanning the ground. It moved like a hawk searching for prey. The alien girl slid off the couch and crawled behind the table, her eyes filled with fear. Ethan ducked down too. "What do they want?" he whispered. She took a deep breath. "They hunt survivors. I escaped. Only one left. Me." Ethan looked at her. "Why? Why hunt you?" Her voice was soft. "Because my people don't fight. We make peace. They hate peace." That hit Ethan hard. These creatures, they hunted peaceful beings. They didn't want war. They wanted fear. The drone moved closer to the cabin. Its red light shined briefly through the window, scanning the area. Ethan held his breath. Max growled but stayed still. After a few minutes, the drone turned and flew off toward the hills. Silence returned, but now it felt like the calm before a storm. Ethan sat back down on the floor. The girl sat across from him, her hands trembling. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Sira." "Nice to meet you, Sira," Ethan said gently. "I'm Ethan, and this is Max." Max wagged his tail once, but his eyes stayed fixed on the window. Sira looked down. "I shouldn't be here. I bring danger." Ethan shook his head. "You didn't bring it. It followed you. That's not your fault." She looked up at him. Her eyes softened. For the first time, she seemed to trust him. Then, slowly, she opened her hand. Inside was a small glowing crystal. It pulsed with a soft blue light. "What is that?" Ethan asked. She held it out to him. "Hope." Before Ethan could ask more, a loud screech echoed through the sky outside. A sound like metal tearing the air. It came from far away, but it was moving fast. Sira's body shook. She curled up against the wall, whispering in her language. Ethan stood up. He felt it too. Something was coming. Not just a drone. Not just a machine. something alive. Ethan's choice. The night felt colder now. Ethan stood near the window, staring out into the dark forest. The trees didn't move. The wind had stopped. It was too quiet. Behind him, Sarah sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. Her silver skin was dull now, her glow weaker than before. The crystal in her hand pulsed slowly like a fading heartbeat. Max lay beside her, his head resting on her leg. The dog didn't bark anymore. He just watched the door, like he was waiting for something to come through it. Ethan's hands were shaking. He had grown up in these woods. He had spent years alone after his sister died. Peace and quiet were all he ever wanted. But now his cabin had turned into a war zone. A lost alien girl was hiding in his living room. And someone, or something, was hunting her. He looked back at her. She was so young, so scared. Her eyes were red from crying, and her body was shaking. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong on this planet. And yet, somehow, she had ended up in his care. Part of him wanted to run. He could grab Max, leave Sarah behind, and hide somewhere deep in the forest until this nightmare was over. He didn't know these hunters. He didn't know what kind of weapons they had. He didn't even know if Earth's army could stop them. But when he looked at Sarah, when he saw how she tried to stay strong, how she held on to that little glowing crystal like it was her only hope, he couldn't turn his back. He remembered something. His sister Leela. She had died 3 years ago in a hospital bed. Cancer. She was only 14. She had cried one night, holding his hand, and said, "Don't let anyone else feel alone like this." That memory hit him hard. Sarah wasn't just an alien. She was a child. Scared, alone, hunted. And no one else knew she was here. Except him. Ethan knelt down next to her. "Sarah," he said gently, "why did you come to Earth?" She looked at him slowly. "My ship was running. No home left. My people are gone." Ethan's heart sank. "All gone?" he asked. She nodded. "I am the last child. They wanted to save me. But the hunters followed. They always follow." Ethan clenched his jaw. His eyes were full of pain, not fear anymore. "What do they want from you?" Sarah stared at the crystal in her hand. "This," she whispered. "It is my people's last light. It can call for help, but it needs power." Ethan understood now. The drone had come because his cabin used electricity. If they used power to send a signal, they would come again, fast and angry. He stood up and looked around his small cabin. It was nothing special. Old wood walls, a fireplace, a couple of shelves, and some tools. No high-tech equipment. No army. Just him. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't need much to fight back. Ethan turned to her. "We'll find a way to power that thing. And we'll send that signal." Sarah blinked, surprised. "You? Help?" Ethan smiled, just a little. "I made a promise once. I won't let anyone feel alone again." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. Then she did something unexpected. She reached forward and gently touched his chest, right over his heart. "You have strong light," she said, "like my people." He felt something in that touch, like warmth spreading through his body. He didn't know what kind of power Sarah had, but it was more than just energy. It was connection. And at that moment, something changed in him. Not just fear, not just sadness. Purpose. Suddenly, Max stood up and growled again. Louder this time. Ethan turned to the window. Red lights blinked in the distance. 3 of them, moving slowly through the trees. Ethan rushed to the table, grabbed his backpack, filled it with water, food, a knife, and the crystal. "We have to move," he said. "Now." Sarah tried to stand but stumbled. Ethan caught her. "I've got you," he said. He wrapped her in a coat, lifted her gently, and opened the back door. Max ran out first, nose low, guiding the path. They disappeared into the forest, into the shadows. Behind them, In the distance, a loud metal sound echoed through the trees. The hunters had landed. And now, they were coming. Not just for the girl, but for the human who chose to stand with her. The hunters land on Earth. The forest was no longer silent. There was a new sound now, a low, deep hum, like something big was moving through the sky. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound natural. It was the sound of something that didn't belong on Earth. Ethan moved fast through the trees, holding Sira in his arms. Max ran ahead, his ears twitching, nose scanning the ground. Syra's breathing was slow, but she was awake. Her hands gripped Ethan's jacket tightly. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "There's an old hunting cave," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's hidden deep in the hills. My dad used it years ago. No power, no signals, just stone and silence." Sira closed her eyes and nodded. "Good. Quiet place is safe. For now." Behind them, the sky flashed red. Ethan looked back. Over the trees, he could see a black shape floating down. Massive, round, and sharp. It wasn't like any ship he'd seen in movies. This was a hunter ship, silent and deadly. As it landed, trees shook. Birds flew in every direction. The ship didn't crash. It settled like a predator choosing its nest. From the shadows of that ship, 3 dark figures stepped out. They were tall, much taller than humans. Their bodies were covered in armor that shimmered like oil under the moonlight. Their helmets had no eyes, only a red light in the center of the face. They moved with slow, careful steps, like they weren't walking, but stalking prey. They were the hunters, and they had arrived on Earth. Back in the forest, Ethan reached the cave. It was hidden behind thick bushes and stones. From the outside, it looked like nothing special, a crack in the rock. But inside, it opened up into a small, dry space, big enough to hide. He laid Sira down on a bed of dry leaves. Her wounds had started to close, but she looked pale. Max sat at the entrance, listening. Ethan took off his backpack, pulled out water, and helped Sira drink. "We'll stay here for the night," he said. "I'll figure something out in the morning." Sira opened her hand and showed him the crystal again. "It is dying," she said. "It needs energy, but safe energy. Natural." Ethan fought hard. "I know where we can get that," he said. "There's an old windmill near the river. It's broken, but maybe I can fix it." Sira touched his hand. "Be careful. They can smell fear." Ethan looked at her. "Then I won't be afraid." Meanwhile, near the cabin, the hunters stood in front of Ethan's empty cabin. The lead hunter touched the ground where Sira had bled. A small device in his gauntlet blinked red. He made a low, growling sound. They spoke in a strange, broken language, more like clicks and growls than words. But their message was clear. "She is close." One of the hunters pointed to a broken tree branch. Another bent down and picked up a piece of cloth, Ethan's jacket sleeve, torn while running. The lead hunter crushed it in his fist. A signal was sent. Tiny drones rose from their ship and flew in every direction. They weren't searching like machines. They were hunting like wolves. Back in the cave, night had fully fallen. The forest was quiet, but not peaceful. Ethan sat near the entrance, holding a sharp stick he had shaped into a spear. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. But tonight, he was the only line between the hunters and Sira. Sira looked at him with tired eyes. "You are brave." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm just doing what's right." She smiled weakly. "That is what bravery is." Suddenly, Max growled, then barked. Ethan jumped to his feet and peeked through the cave entrance. One of the small drones was hovering near the bushes. It made no sound, just blinked softly in the dark. Ethan grabbed a rock, took a deep breath, and threw it as hard as he could. Crack! The rock hit the drone. It sparked and crashed to the ground. But it was too late. The red light on the drone blinked 3 times, signal sent. Ethan turned to Sira. They know where we are. Sira stood up slowly. We must move. Now. But Ethan looked outside and froze. Far off in the trees, 3 red lights were moving. Closer. Faster. They're coming, he said. Sira clutched the crystal. Max barked again, louder this time. There was no time left to run. In the forest clearing, the 3 hunters stood still. One of them raised a long, sharp weapon. It looked like a spear made of light and metal. They moved forward together, step by step, but something strange happened. They stopped. The lead hunter tilted his head. Then, with a hiss, he turned his gaze. Up. Above them, hidden in the stars, something was watching. Not human. Not hunter. Something else. And whatever it was, it had also received the signal Sira was trying to send. Humanity fights back. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills, but it brought no peace. Ethan's cabin was gone, burned down during the night by the hunters. Smoke still curled into the sky. Trees near the area were scorched, the earth blackened, the silence heavy. But Ethan wasn't there anymore. He and Sira were hiding near the river, deep in the forest, far from any road, far from any help. They had escaped death, but only barely. Sira sat by the water, her legs folded, the glowing crystal in her hands. She was whispering something in her language. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a deep sadness. Ethan knelt next to her. Is it working? He asked. Sira shook her head. Not yet. It is too weak. Needs more energy. Ethan looked at the small windmill in the distance, old, rusted, forgotten. He had found it the night before while searching for anything useful. It had once powered a small shed, long abandoned. I think I can fix it, he said. You sure? Sira asked softly. Ethan looked at her, then at the crystal. I have to be. Later that day, with Max guarding the area, Ethan climbed the windmill's wooden frame. The windmill creaked under his weight. He carried a small toolkit he had saved from his cabin. He worked with focus, his hands scraped, his shirt dirty. Sira sat nearby, watching. Every now and then, her eyes scanned the trees. She could feel the hunters moving closer again. But something was different now. She didn't feel alone. She didn't feel like a lost child anymore. There was someone fighting for her. For the first time since escaping her dying world, she felt hope. At night, the windmill turned slowly. The blades creaked as the wind picked up. The wires Ethan had reconnected started to buzz. The small battery inside the box hummed with life. It wasn't much power, but it was enough. Sira placed the crystal inside the charging slot they had built together. It lit up brighter than before, soft blue light glowing through the forest trees. She looked at Ethan. It's working. He smiled, tired but proud, then let send the signal. But before they could celebrate, footsteps, fast, heavy, from the trees. Max barked once, then stood still, ears back. Someone was coming. Ethan grabbed the spear he had made from a metal rod and sharpened wood. He stood in front of Sira, ready to fight. But it wasn't a hunter. A voice called out through the trees. Ethan, that you? Ethan froze. Maya, he called back. From the trees, a young woman stepped out, dressed in a dark hoodie and cargo pants. She had a laptop strapped to her back and a drone remote in her hand. She ran up to Ethan and hugged him. You're alive, she said. I saw the crash reports, then your cabin burned, and then. She stopped, noticing Sira. Wait, is that her? Ethan nodded. She's the one. Her name is Sira. Maya stared at the alien girl for a moment, shocked, but not afraid. Wow, okay, she's real. You weren't crazy. Ethan laughed. Not yet. Who is Maya? Maya was Ethan's childhood friend. They had grown up together until she moved to the city. She was smart, quick, and a tech genius. When Ethan had secretly sent a coded message through a backup radio signal, she had heard it. "I tracked your signal to this area," Maya explained. "And guess what? The military is scrambling. Something huge is in the sky. They're hiding it from the public. But I know. I hacked a satellite feed." She pulled out her laptop and showed them a blurry image. A large ship, not from Earth, moving above the clouds. "It's orbiting us," she said. "Something else heard your alien friend's signal." Sarah stood slowly, looking at the screen. "My people?" "Maybe," Maya said. "Or someone worse. Either way, this little crystal just lit up the galaxy." Preparing to fight back, Ethan, Maya, and Sarah worked through the night. They gathered old tools, built traps from wire and wood, and set alarms near the trees. Maya reprogrammed one of her drones to scan for heat signatures. "We can't fight them head-on," Ethan said, "but we can slow them down." Sarah nodded. "They think humans are weak." "They're about to find out we're not," Maya said, loading a battery into her drone. That same night, deep in the woods, the hunters were moving again. They had found the broken drone, the one Ethan destroyed. It led them to the windmill. They stopped. They listened. Then the lead hunter made a low, sharp sound. His armor opened slightly, revealing a long, thin creature inside, its body pulsing like muscle and machine. The hunters were not just machines. They were living things inside shells of war. And now, they were angry. Very angry. They marched forward, quiet, deadly. But this time, Ethan and his friends were waiting. The tower battle. The radio tower stood like a lonely giant in the distance. Old, rusty, forgotten by time. Its metal frame bent slightly to one side, and vines wrapped around its legs like nature was trying to pull it down. But to Sarah, it looked like hope. To Ethan, it looked like the last chance. They had one mission: get Sarah's crystal to the top and send the full signal. It was the only way to call for help. Real help. But they knew the hunters wouldn't let them. Not this time. Hours before dawn, Ethan tightened the straps on his backpack. Inside it was the glowing crystal, wrapped in cloth to hide its light. Maya checked her drone one last time. It buzzed quietly, ready to fly. Sarah stood still, looking up at the tower. Her skin was glowing brighter now, stronger. The energy from the windmill had helped her heal faster. She was still weak, but her spirit was alive. "We ready?" Ethan asked. Maya nodded. "We won't get a second chance." Sarah looked at both of them. "If I fall, keep fighting." Ethan put a hand on her shoulder. "We don't leave anyone behind." They moved fast and quiet through the trees. At the base of the tower, the ground was soft from last night's rain. Mud covered their boots as they climbed the hill. The tower rose above them, wires hanging, metal creaking in the wind. Maya connected her laptop to the tower's base terminal. Sparks flew. "This thing is ancient," she whispered, "but I can wake it up." Sarah handed her the crystal. It pulsed gently, like a heart. Maya placed it inside a slot they had prepared. The tower lights flickered. A deep hum began, vibrating through the ground. "It's working," Maya said. "Signal is building. Just needs height." Ethan looked up. The top was far. Too far. "I'll climb," he said. Sarah stepped forward. "No, I must carry it." "You can barely stand," Ethan said. "Let me do it." Sarah looked at him with steady eyes. "This is my message. My people. My fight." Ethan didn't argue. He simply nodded. He gave her his jacket. "Then I'm going with you." The climb begins. The ladder was old and sharp. Every step was painful. Ethan climbed just below Sarah, one hand always ready to catch her. Maya stayed below, guiding them through the radio. "You're halfway," she said, signal getting stronger. But then, the ground shook. Trees bent. The sky went dark. The hunters had arrived. "The battle begins," 3 hunters stepped out of the forest like shadows made of steel. Their red eyes glowed in the fog. The ground cracked under their heavy boots. One of them lifted a long, glowing weapon. Maya screamed into the radio. "They're here. Hurry." She grabbed her drone remote and sent her machines into the sky. The drones flew fast, blinking red and green, trying to distract the hunters. It worked for a few seconds. One hunter shot a drone out of the sky with a flash of blue fire. The second hunter raised his arm and launched a disc-shaped blade that spun like lightning. It hit the tower's side, cutting deep into the metal. Ethan almost lost his grip. Sira cried out but held on. "I'm okay," he shouted. "Keep going." The final climb. The wind grew stronger at the top. The tower swayed slightly, but Sira didn't stop. She reached the final platform, shaking, bleeding from her hand, but still standing. She placed the crystal into the tower's core. It glowed brighter than ever. The whole tower lit up, a beacon in the night. Below, the hunters roared. The leader jumped into the air, climbing the tower with terrifying speed. Ethan turned. "Go, Sira. Finish it." The crystal began to pulse. Once, twice, faster. Then, the signal launched. A giant beam of blue light shot into the sky, cutting through the clouds like a sword. The wind howled. The air shook, far above the earth. A light answered. Sira collapsed to her knees, smiling. "They heard me." The fight to survive. The lead hunter reached the top. Ethan stood between him and Sira. He had no weapons, just his hands, his heart, and the will to protect. The hunter raised his blade. But before it could strike, boom! A drone, reprogrammed by Maya, slammed into the hunter's chest. It exploded in a burst of fire and sparks. The hunter screamed and fell, his armor cracking, his red eye flickering. Ethan dropped to his knees, covering Sira. The tower shook. The metal screamed. Maya shouted through the radio. "Get out of there." Ethan pulled Sira to her feet. Together, they climbed down, fast, broken, bloody. Below, Maya waited. Max barked and ran to meet them. They collapsed to the ground, alive. The tower behind them burned, but the signal was sent. Far above Earth, in the dark space beyond the stars, a giant ship turned toward Earth. It was not a hunter. Its silver sails opened. Its lights blinked in the pattern of Sira's language. A message came back. "We are coming. A new home, a new hope." The stars above Earth were not the same anymore. In the quiet sky, just beyond what most humans could see, a new ship hovered, massive, glowing silver, shaped like a star unfolding. It didn't roar or flash weapons. It simply watched, peaceful and patient. It had heard the signal, and it had come in peace. But down on Earth, the ground was still recovering from war. 2 days after the battle, Ethan sat on the porch of Maya's small safe house, a cabin near the mountains she had once used as a hideout. Now, it was the only place left for them to rest. His hands were bandaged. His ribs were sore. He hadn't slept properly in 2 days. But he was alive. Inside, Sira slept on a soft bed, wrapped in warm blankets. The crystal, now dim, rested near her heart. Max lay at the foot of the bed, as if guarding her from the nightmares. Outside, birds chirped. Wind moved gently through the trees. Peace at last. Sira's recovery. When she woke, Sira didn't speak at first. She simply looked around the room, then at the sunlight pouring through the window. She smiled. She whispered, "This feels like home." Ethan walked in with a bowl of warm soup. "It can be," he said. She sat up slowly, hands shaking a little. "No more hunters?" Ethan nodded. "They're gone. The others, the ones you called, scared them off. They didn't want war. Just fear, but they lost." Sira looked down. "Because of you." "No," Ethan said, placing the bowl near her. Because of us, the world begins to change. Across Earth, stories began to spread. Some thought it was a lie. Others called it a miracle. Satellite feeds showed blurry images, a beam of blue light rising into the sky, then vanishing. Military radars showed strange activity in space, unexplained movement. Governments scrambled to understand what had happened. But for the people in the forest, the truth was clear. An alien child came to Earth, hunted by monsters, and saved by humans. And the universe heard her cry. Maya's message. Maya spent her time uploading coded signals, broadcasting the story through encrypted channels, hidden from governments but visible to those who wanted to know. She didn't tell the full story, just the heart of it. A stranger came to our world. She brought danger, yes, but also truth. And we, simple humans, stood beside her. We didn't run. We didn't hide. We helped. And in doing so, we proved we are ready. Ready for more than war. Ready to be seen. The message spread, not like fire, but like hope. A choice to make. Days later, the silver ship finally landed, not in front of cameras or in the heart of cities, but quietly, deep in the forest clearing where Syrah had first crashed. Its doors opened with soft light. Two beings stepped out, taller than humans, with smooth skin that shimmered like water. They wore robes, not armor. Their faces were kind. They bowed to Syrah, placing their hands over their hearts. "You are safe," one of them said. "You can come home." Syrah looked at Ethan. Her eyes were full of tears, but she didn't speak right away. Ethan's goodbye, or not. Later that night, Syrah and Ethan sat by a small fire outside the safe house. "You should go," Ethan said quietly. "Be with your people. You belong up there." Syrah was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "And where do you belong?" Ethan stared at the stars. "I don't know. I used to think it was here, alone. But now." He looked at her. "Now I think maybe we choose where we belong." Syrah reached into her pocket and handed him a second crystal, smaller than hers, but glowing. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "Bond crystal," she said. "Means we are connected. Always." Ethan smiled. A tear slid down his cheek. A new beginning. Syrah didn't leave Earth. Not fully. She chose to stay for a while longer. To help, to teach, to prepare. The ship stayed in orbit, watching quietly. The hunters were gone. For now. But the galaxy was changing. And Earth was no longer hidden. Syrah became the bridge between two worlds. And Ethan. He became the first human trusted by another species, not because of power or science or weapons, but because he cared, because he helped, because when a wounded alien girl crawled for help, only a human answered the call.